Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so Mother Nature Part 13, I want to talk about crop rotation, and I have touched on this in the past, where I've been showing you the plans of the allotment, how I've gone through the sort of the last 3 years to see the rotation of how I do things. Now, crop rotation is one of the principles of organic gardening, and I know I've mentioned these before, but there are 4 main principles of organic gardening. The first one is obviously starting with the ground, and in the previous videos, and obviously in sort of January and February, I discussed how to how to get fertilizers and stuff into the ground, and how to get organic material into the ground, and basically the first principle is starting with the ground. To maintain a fertile and living soil, obviously you need to feed the ground with all these minerals, because you've got bacteria and fungi and all sorts of microorganisms in the ground, which are really important to the plants, because they have this sort of relationship where all of these bacteria, microorganisms and fungi and stuff break down the organic material and all the goodness in the stuff that you're putting into the ground, and break that into the minerals that the plants need, and they also bring it to the plants if we're talking about mycorrhizal fungi. So it's really important that you have this living soil. Soils that have had chemicals on them and pesticides and all those sorts of things, which are not organic, a lot of these things in the soil would have been killed, and they are and then the nutrients can't get to the plants as well. So this is one of the benefits of being organic. Also with the soil, obviously you need, to keep the structure of the soil, you need the right amount of water in there. So you need a free draining ground, which is also obviously kept moist. Now you don't want too much water and you don't want too little water. If you have either of these two extremes, it destroys the structure of the soil. And you want the soil to be able to breathe. You need to be able to get the oxygen and the carbon dioxide out of the air. You need to be able to get all of these things in and out of the soil. And the soil will breathe during the day and night as it warms up and cools down. And you want to have a carbon-rich soil. And the way you tell you've got a carbon-rich soil is if you look at your soil will be dark. The darker the better. It should be like a dark brown sort of colour, your earth. Obviously, if you're in an area where the ground's sandy or whatever, it might be slightly lighter. But you need a humus-rich soil, meaning you've got a lot of carbon in there, which is going to break down in the ground and form carbon dioxide for your plants to breathe, and then obviously you're going to get the larger yields. And obviously the ground needs to be aerated, so you need to be digging it, and you need to be getting the sort of breaking up there. You need the microorganisms and the worms and all the other good stuff in there to keep breaking the soil up and giving the soil the structure. I mean, if you look at anybody that's organic, the soil should be crumbly like a cake. And that's a really good sign that the ground's well looked after, and it should be a dark colour. The second principle of organic gardening is not to use any chemicals, pesticides or sort of disease control as much as possible. Obviously there are certain diseases that you might get, you've got no choice, you've got to use something, but obviously you have to draw the line at some point. But luckily in all the years that I've been gardening, it hasn't really, there's only been a very few occasions where I've had to really resort to that. There's normally some organic means out there to sort out any problems, and basically you're not in doing that, you're not damaging any of the beneficial things in the soil again, like the bacteria, the microorganisms, the fungi and all the rest of it. by not using chemicals. If you use an organic measure, you can guarantee that that will be targeting the problem that you've got, and not anything else, if you like. So that's the second principle. The third principle, which is something I'm going to be coming on to later in Mother Nature, is hygiene. Now, hygiene's all about removing diseased plants or any dead material or anything that's clearly wrong in your garden before it becomes a problem. Now, obviously, to minimise the amount of diseases or anything like that you've got in the garden, what you need to do is keep at least the foliage of the plant reasonably dry to get rid of any fungus problems, and also any disease. Obviously, what you want to do is remove that disease before it spreads to all of your rows or all of your other plants of similar, out of the same family. So that's the third part, hygiene. I will come on to that in more detail in a few weeks' time. And the fourth principle is rotating crops, which is what I'm going to be talking about now. Now, rotating crops is done for two main reasons. The first reason is, and quite possibly the most important reason, is disease control. And when I say disease, I'm not only talking about diseases, I'm also talking about sort of fungi. There are some fungi in the ground which are, that will cause you problems. Obviously, there are some really beneficial ones in the ground. There are also ones that will cause you problems. Some fungi will cause canker, which is rotting at the base of the plant. It'll also cause tropical root rot, and by rotating your plants, what you're doing is plants that will suffer from this, you're only sort of growing them in one area for 1 year, so there won't be a build-up of disease in the ground. And also, the other thing that you need to look at as well is things like slugs. Now, for example, if you've got a plant in a given area, say potatoes for example, you know that the eelworms that are in the ground will go for the potatoes. Now, if you grow the potatoes time and time again in the same soil, there'll be a build-up of these pests in the soil, and they'll keep attacking the plant. If you move the plants to another area of your allotment, then these pests that were in that area for last season will obviously have no food and obviously either die out or sort of whatever. So there's that. It's not only disease control, it's also pest control. And you can also look at to a degree some types of aphid as well, because they will stay in the ground. If you plant a similar plant there again, or from the same family, like a brassica or whatever, then they'll jump on the plant and cause you problems again. So the first main reason for rotation, and probably the most important, is disease and pest control. The second, possibly less important reason for crop rotation is balancing the nutrients in the grounds. Now, different crops have different requirements. Things like potatoes, root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, and things like that do not have a very high requirement for nitrogen. They're wanting the other, out of your NPK, they're wanting the P and the K, if you like. So they don't need too much nitrogen. So if you follow them from something which is nitrogen rich, such as brassicas, need a lot of nitrogen. So in your brassicas you're talking about broccoli, cauliflower, kale, these sorts of things. They need a lot of nitrogen out of the ground. And the third main group, there's one or two ways you can do this, which I'll explain in a second. The third group are your what we call the pod crops, like beans, peas, all the types of beans, French beans, runner beans, broad beans, all the rest of it. These need a lot of nitrogen out of the these put nitrogen into the ground. So you can look at it in two different ways. Really, what you want to do is at a minimum, you need 1 year between crop rotation. So, for example, the way I've got my allotment set up, I tend to, the potatoes have a 1 year rotation, purely because I grow a lot of potatoes. I grow out of my allotment, as I've explained in the past, a quarter of it is taken up by this greenhouse and the perennial plants like the raspberries, the strawberries, the asparagus, etc. And obviously this greenhouse is not going to move. So that's already taken a quarter up. The potatoes take up about a quarter of the allotment. The bottom quarter of my allotment is no good for growing potatoes. It gets too waterlogged, or can do in the season, and I have lost some crops of potatoes that way. So my potatoes rotate backwards and forwards in the middle half of the allotment. So it's not ideal, but unfortunately I've got no choice because of the way that the allotment's set out. And I think a lot of people, if you grow the amount of potatoes that I grow, if you're growing like 10 rows or more of potatoes, you know, you're not going to have enough room within a standard sized 108 by 26 foot plot. You're not going to have enough room to rotate them through a 3-year plan. So that's not particularly a problem. A 1-year cycle works well with potatoes. And if you look on all of the, you know, the sort of the, you know, the like the Royal Horticultural Society and all the rest of it, you know, they say a 1-year rotation is okay for potatoes. So you know I know I'm doing all right, and I've never had sort of a problem, apart from I get blight obviously, but that's not in the soil, that's airborne. So there's 2 ways to think about this. Basically what you want to do is you want to start off with your pod crops. Now they're going to be putting there, your beans, your peas, etc. They're going to be putting nitrogen into the ground, and then when you take the plants out, what you want to do is with bacteria in those plants, they store nitrogen into the ground. So when you take them off, you want to leave the roots in the ground. And then the next year what you'll do is you'll grow brassicas. Now brassicas are the, you know, obviously plants like, I don't know, cauliflower and kale and all this type of stuff, and broccoli. And they need a lot of nitrogen. So if you follow beans and peas and stuff with brassicas, there'll be sufficient nitrogen in the ground to, you know, for them to grow and you know give you good yields. Then the year after that, on a 3-year plan, that's when you'd start to put your roots, your onions and your leaf type vegetables in. So you're talking about, you know, your potatoes, obviously onions, garlic, leeks, and then your leaves. You know, you're really talking about spinach, chard, salad, and then obviously your roots, you're talking parsnips, you know, your beetroots, your potatoes and stuff like that. Beetroots are sort of brassicas, but you know, the nutrients that they take, you know, you can sort of classify them really as a sort of root vegetable because of the needs that they have, sort of thing. So you can look at it that way. You can put a crop in your beans which will give nitrogen. Then you plant your brassicas in that position, which need the nitrogen, and then the 3rd year you have a rest and you grow your roots. Or you can look at it in exactly the opposite way. So you start off with your roots, then you have your brassicas, which are going to take all the nitrogen out of the ground, and then the next year you grow your pods, which then replace that nitrogen. So you can look at it in 2 ways. You can either put the nitrogen, use the nitrogen, yeah, or you can use the nitrogen, put the nitrogen back. There's 2 ways of rotation. You can turn the whole thing around if you like. So a 3-year plan typically works quite well for allotments, and you don't really need to go much further than that. Just very quickly, there are some plants that you don't need to rotate, and these are quite useful really, because what you can do is you can set out when I'm planning the allotment, what I will do is I'll plan out them 3 groups. And then all of the spaces that you've got left over is where you put these crops. And these crops that you don't need to rotate are things like courgettes, pumpkins, squashes, lettuce and spinach to a degree. Particularly the spinach, beet and because these plants don't really get much disease in the ground, and the nutrients that they take out of the ground are reasonably sort of balanced, so you don't need to be worried too much. Now, with my allotment, I always put loads of stuff in the ground anyway. I'm constantly pouring, you know, organic matter into the ground. You know, I'm pouring leaf mould, I'm pouring, you know, sort of wood chips, and I'm pouring straw, I'm pouring muck, I'm pouring all, you know, all the sorts of thing, which is high carbon. So my allotment anyway is very high in humus, but you know, really the reason I rotate the crops is all about the disease, which is why I explained it first. That's why I rotate. There is a 5-year plan that you can use. I don't use this, but basically what you would do on a 5-year plan is you'd start with your brassicas, then you go to your pods, so you're using the nitrogen, then replacing the nitrogen. pods being your peas and your beans. Then you go to potatoes, so that's really the first three that I've been talking about. Then you go to onions, then you go to roots. So potatoes, obviously, potatoes, we particularly use a lot of them. Then onions, you're talking about your leeks, your garlic, your onions, etc., your shallots. And then the fifth one is your roots, so you're talking about parsnips, carrots, etc. So that's a 5-year plan. I don't use that, but that obviously is also another way of doing it. And I've found with my allotment, to be honest with you, a 1-year rotation with potatoes works quite well, and I haven't had any problems or diseases because of that. So I rotate my potatoes backwards and forwards, and then where the potatoes were the year before, I will be putting brassicas, and I'll be putting the beans and the peas and stuff like that. So those two really I sort of rotate backwards and forwards. Because I'm putting a lot of nitrogen into the ground, I don't really need to worry about it too much. I put, as you know, I put a lot of coffee into the ground, and I also put a lot of other nitrogen-rich things in there. I put a lot of green manure in there. I will dig in a lot of green stuff in there as well. And also for the beans and the peas, I always dig trenches, so I'm putting stuff under them. And the brassicas, I'll always put coffee on the ground, as you've seen me in the past, to boost the nitrogen in the ground, because that's what they need. So that's crop rotation in a nutshell, really. And but really the important part, which I can't stress enough, is the disease control. That's why you're doing it. Okay, so I just want to do a quick shout out. I've been to Tamworth Allotment Society today, who are based in Tamworth, Staffordshire, and they're just off the A51, going out towards Opwas on the Lichfield Road. And I just want to say that when you compare the prices of the fertilisers that you can get from allotment societies, it really is worthwhile you enrolling in one. And obviously, if you are in the Tamworth Lichfield area, then it's worthwhile giving these guys a look up. But this is bloodfish and bone meal, which is something that I use quite a lot of. It's a slow release organic fertiliser, and as you can see, the NPK is 556, so it's a good all-round slow release fertiliser. Of course, it's organic. And also bone meal, which is really a form of calcium for the ground. Again, £1.45 for this, for a kilo, or just over a kilo, and this was £1.65 from the allotment. If you bought these from the shops, even the cheapest shops, you're going to be paying maybe 4 or 5 times this amount. So look up in if you're not in the Tamworth Lichfield area, do look up in your local area for allotment societies, and by and far the majority of them will have outlets like this, and you can save yourself a small fortune by buying your fertilisers, your seed potatoes and all that kind of thing, your onion sets and your seeds from these societies, because they buy them in bulk, and obviously they pass on the benefits that you get from buying things in bulk. So look up. I just wanted to give the Tamworth Allotment Society a shout out, because they're doing some really good work there. And as I say, I've already given you the address, but look those guys up if you live within sort of 10-15 miles, maybe 20 miles of them, because it's well worth going down and getting your stuff. Okay, just do a quick question section and comments that have been put on the channel over the last couple of days. And the first one comes from Mark Davis, and he was saying, have you ever heard of pumping carbon dioxide into your greenhouse? Yes, this works really well. Obviously your plants are breathing carbon dioxide, but what I tend to do, if you look at my early videos, is when I prepare the beds, what I put into the beds is I normally put about 6 inches of chicken muck and straw. Obviously, there's a lot of straw and there's a lot of carbon matter in there. Then I put on top of that grass cuttings, about another 4 or 5 inches of that. And I'll put the grass in there for 2 reasons. One, as it breaks down, it generates a lot of heat, and 2, there's a lot of nitrogen in there, which the bacteria sort of get onto and sort of break down the straw and that into carbon. Now, over the year, as I water the greenhouse and it warms up and cools down, this carbon is going to turn into carbon dioxide and then fill the greenhouse with carbon dioxide at night, which is when which will then be there for the plants to breathe. So yes, this does help, and obviously that's another reason to put lots of muck and straw and stuff in your greenhouse, because what you want to do is get the carbon dioxide levels up in your greenhouse, so your tomatoes and cucumbers and everything else that you grow in your greenhouse will have plenty of carbon dioxide to breathe. So that was from Mark Davis. Thank you for your comment, Mark. The second one's from Shannon Robinson, and she's come up with another useful jam jars, following from the jam jar recycling bit. And she says that she uses jam jars with dry compost and vermiculite in there, with some reasonably large holes in there to sprinkle over the smaller seeds, which I thought was a really good idea. The next one comes from, the next couple come from Ken Fuller. Hello, Ken. He was saying that he's put lime on the ground, and he says and he's measured the pH in his garden over the past couple of weeks, and he said he's got an imbalance in pH, sort of ranging from acidic to neutral. And he was saying, do plants change the pH? To be honest with you, plants themselves don't typically change the pH of the ground. What will change the pH of the ground is what you put into it. So if you put in a lot of chicken muck, that tends to be acidic. And if you put and if your soil's particularly lime anyway, it'll have a considerably higher sort of pH anyway. So it's more dependent on what stuff you're putting into the ground and what your soil's like anyway. And obviously if you're putting lime on there as well. So that, I'm not aware of any plants that change the pH of the ground, to be honest with you. I think you have to, it's what, manure and stuff you put into the ground typically, or compost, which is typically changing the pH of the ground. I'm not aware of any plants that actually change the pH of the soil, or at least to any degree. The next one he was talking about, that he's also used bottles in his greenhouse to water his tomatoes and stuff. As a slow drip. He said he's got a bottle and he's drilled one hole in the bottom, in the top, and then he's turned it upside down, cut the bottom off, and then used them to water. He said that's worked out quite well. So I think a number of people have used that over the past couple of years. The next one's from Tony's Allotment. Hi, Tony. He asked about, he was talking about pallets and wood chip and biochar. And basically what he does is he's got a chipper and he uses pallets, another way of using pallets, and he basically shreds the pallets up into wood chip, and then he makes wood char from there. So that's another use for the garden for recycling pallets. But I guess it's the kind of same thing as using wood chip like I do, from people who tree surgeons and stuff. It's the same kind of thing, but he uses the wood from pallets and he sort of chips them up with his shredder, and uses them on his paths, and also his for making biochar. Bill's Allotment has asked, is there any sort of table or anything for watering vegetables? And I haven't got one. It's just from knowledge. But what I'll do is I'll put a table together and put it on either Facebook or something like that, or I'll show it in a future episode. But basically, what you need to be looking at is things like beans, peas, and stuff like that. Really, you need to be watering them pretty much every day, unless it rains, depending on what your soil type's like. But I always water beans and peas pretty much every day, and I give them a good soak a couple of hours before it goes dark with watering cans. Now I put in 26 foot of runner beans, and I will put 8 of these a day on there. Most certainly when they're growing, to start with, and then when the pods start to form, that's really when you need to water them as well. Peas always like a bit of water. Obviously, don't overwater things, but what I will do with peas, I tend to grow about 10-foot pea rows, and then I'll make another row, and then what I will do is every day I'll put at least one of these on there whilst they're growing and forming the pods. So not as much as beans, but I do water the peas quite well. Other things like parsnips, turnips, swede, stuff like that, you don't need to water too often. Most certainly when the plants are getting established, you water them. But most things with parsnips is you don't want the parsnip to become lazy. You don't want the water to be too close to it. You want it to go down and find the water itself, because obviously you want a nice long tapping route. So parsnips, I tend to put one of these watering cans on one row, or so a row being 26 foot long, and I will put one of them along the row, so I go up the row reasonably quickly, and I'm just keeping the ground moist really. Obviously the greenhouse, water that every day without fail, at least once a day. Things like carrots I don't really bother with. The spinach I will water possibly once or twice a week, depending on what weather we've had during the summer. The brassicas I don't tend to water much at all. With brassicas, one thing I will say is always water brassicas with rainwater. Never be tempted to water brassicas with tap water, because I've heard a lot of people have told me over the years that watering brassicas with tap water will encourage clubroot. So always water your I don't know the scientific reason why, but always water your brassicas with water out of your water butts. And that's really the main crops. Potatoes, really, last year I didn't water my potatoes at all, and I regretted it afterwards because my yield wasn't that good last year. But I think potatoes, you're okay watering them kind of once a week or once every fortnight, and give them a really good watering with, the things with potatoes, when you do water them, you need to give them a really good soaking. So seeping hoses and things like that are a really good idea. Don't use a sprinkler on potatoes, because you're just encouraging the fungus and the blight to attack. Really, with potatoes, you don't want the tops to be wet at all. You need to be watering the ground, and when you water them really well. You're much better off with potatoes giving them a really good soaking every couple of weeks, rather than watering them every day and sprinkling the top, because you're going to come into problems doing that. Okay, the next one's from Katie Lee, another jam jar method. She uses jam jars to do cuttings, so she's got a row of jam jars in her greenhouse, and she's taking cuttings off violets, lemongrass, and stuff like that on her shelf. And she's got some larger jam jars in there, and she puts in black currants, red currants and stuff like that in the larger jam jars. And she said she replaces the water every couple of weeks, and she gets some really good results for rooting. So that's another use for jam jars. The next one's from Janice Holland over in Ireland, and she's saying she's had problems with drainage in her greenhouse, in her polytunnel, and she's been digging some trenches out. When we were talking about the drainage the other day, she's been digging some drain sort of ditches and filling them with gravel in her tunnel. So she was saying that that has helped her polytunnel. The next one, again from Ken Fuller. Thank you, Ken, for your comment. The next one, another use for a jam jar. He said if you get a jam jar and put a garlic clove in there and then shake it, it will knock all the skin off a garlic, so you can actually peel garlic with a jam jar. Never tried that before, Ken, but that's a really good tip. Number 10 is from John Payne, and he was saying watering potatoes in a 40-litre bucket, how often would you do it? Now, Mark Davison is most certainly the expert in growing potatoes in a bucket. I've got to say, he knows his stuff. He's got 40 buckets this year ready to pour all his potatoes in, so he's possibly better to answer this question than me, because I don't grow them in buckets. But I would most certainly say, with growing potatoes in a bucket, I would drill some holes in the bottom of the bucket so it'll drain. You don't want the potatoes to be sitting in water. And you want enough water in there for the potato to, to have enough water, but you don't want it to be wet. So I would imagine, I'm not an expert on this, possibly Mark could put up a comment on this video, but I would suggest you put in a bucket, I would probably suggest you put, I don't know, maybe 2 litres, 1 or 2 litres every couple of days, I would say. I'm going to have a go at growing some in buckets this year, because I've been watching Mark's videos, and I think I'll have a go at some potatoes in a bucket this year. I have grown them in a barrel before, in a barrel with no bottom in, and I had quite a few good results from that. I just put 2 big seed potatoes in the bottom, and I grew them up and kept putting stuff on, exactly like Aaron does as well. That's how he grows his potatoes. He does them in little bulk bags, but I would say you want 1 litre or 2 in there. What you do want to make sure is you're much better off watering them once a week and giving them plenty, so it penetrates through into the ground, rather than giving them a bit every day. I would most certainly say. But I would say you don't want them sitting in water, so give them a reasonable amount of water perhaps a couple of times a week, and then, you know, sort of most certainly don't overwater them. Don't water the leaves because you don't want the leaves to be wet. The last one comes from Mark Davis again, and he was talking about worms and, you know, talking about the wormer, etc. And he was saying that now Mark's a really big fisherman, and he's sort of, you know, just really knowledgeable about sort of baiting and stuff like that. And he said that he gets his worms from any good sort of fishing shop, and he reckons you can get a kilo of worms for about £8. What's the comment he put on mine. Actually, on his last video, he said he pays £16 for worms. So I think it's probably, it depends on the type of worms that you get. But the brandling worms, the red ones, he said, you know, you can get a kilo of them, which is, I'd imagine, quite a few, for about £8 from a fishing shop. So if you've got any local fishing shops, that's where to get your worms from, unless you get them over the internet. So that's the questions for this week. So, other than the comfrey, the one thing that I've managed to do this week is I've not managed to get any more digging done because basically the wind's just been far too horrific. As you can, sorry, the rain's just been far too wet and the ground's not. But I've put some well rotted down wood chippings on here as well, and I'll be putting the chicken manure on there later. This weekend as well. But the one thing that I was saying I was going to do quite a few months ago, but I've actually managed to get around to it now, is I've actually completely mulched the rhubarb. Obviously the rhubarb is just about coming through now, and it's rhubarb love water, and even though this is the wet part of the allotment, what I've done is I've put about 6 inches of sort of well rotted wood chip on there, sort of biochar on there, and the so on this rhubarb now, what I've got is about 6 inches of chicken manure, which I put on back in October, and I've now just put about 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches of wood chippings on top as a mulch. So that'll rot down quite nicely during the stage of the year. But the rhubarb is coming through, but obviously I covered it with this yesterday, so it'll in the next couple of days it'll start to show its shoots through again. Well, I'm afraid we've been rained off for the rest of today, so I'll have to call it a day, I think. But thank you for watching everything on this channel, and thank you for watching this episode. I hope it's been as informative for you, and if you've got any questions or any queries about anything that I've said or shown, please do drop your comments below, and I'll always get back to you with the answers. Thank you very much indeed. Bye bye now.